In the early part of 1997, I received a gift that would forever change the course of my life. All right, that's maybe a little bit dramatic because it was just a 4-pack of video games. I don't actually remember two of them, and the third one I only remember the title of. I'm not sure I ever actually even played it for very long, but the fourth game was really important. It was Quest for Glory 4, Shadows of Darkness, and it's a point-and-click adventure fused with an RPG, and it honestly changed how I looked at video games. I played the heck out of this game, but always knew I was missing something because I hadn't played the first three titles in the series. So later that year for my birthday, I made sure that that was on my wish list, and when I got it, I was hooked, even deeper than I'd already been with Quest for Glory 4. So we're going to take a look today at the game that started it all, Quest for Glory 1, So You Want to Be a Hero. Hello and welcome to the channel. My name is Shrimpicles, and in this series, we're going to revisit some cherished classics from my past. I'm going to check out some games that maybe I missed out on, and occasionally we'll take a deep dive into a brand new release. I'll play through each game, and I'll make some opinion-based decisions as to whether or not it stands the test of time. This is Game Reflections. In 1989, adventure game titan Sierra Online developed and published Quest for Glory, So You Want to Be a Hero. The initial game was a text parser and combined aspects of Sierra's successful King's Quest series with role-playing game elements. The game was designed by husband and wife duo Corey and Lorianne Cole and was created using Sierra's proprietary engine, the Sierra Creative Interpreter. When Lorianne Cole initially pitched her idea to Sierra, she did so as a rich and narrative-driven role-playing game experience. It was that role-playing element that would separate the QFG series from the various sister series at Sierra already, by giving players choice and freedom in the game that hadn't been seen in those other adventure titles. Sierra also marketed the game as 3 games in 1, given that the game had 3 different classes, all of which had different solutions to puzzles, and sometimes even entirely unique puzzles to solve. However, what made QFG even more interesting was the freedom to assign points at character creation to various skills, and in doing so, you could buy into skills that were not normally available to your chosen class and change the way the game was played. In an effort to maintain the ongoing naming conventions of Sierra Online's games, the original title for this game was actually Hero's Quest. But following some trademark litigation with Milton Bradley regarding the Hero Quest board game, they re-released the title as Quest for Glory, So You Want to Be a Hero in 1990. When Quest for Glory originally released, as I mentioned, it did so as a text parser with EGA graphics. Players could input commands like ask about brigands or get rock. And while I've played this version through a handful of times, and maybe in the future I'll do it again for another video, this video is actually focused on the 1992 VGA remake, which utilized a point-and-click interface, as well as a dialogue tree that narrowed the focus for the player. Personally, I prefer the point-and-click interface, though there are some that argue that the original EGA version of QFG1 is the superior version of the game. For this retrospective, I played through the game a lot of times. In fact, I played it 7 times to be exact, because I knew that many of the puzzles have alternate solutions, and even though I've played it a bunch of times in the past, I was really keen on seeing just how different each class played in a back-to-back kind of fashion where I could really compare those differences. I also had made it a goal to ensure that I achieved a perfect 500 out of 500 score with all 3 of the available classes, and on a few occasions, I actually missed that mark by as little as a single point. So I'd then replay the game again until I achieved that perfect score. We'll discuss the differences between the classes as we discuss the story and gameplay, but I will state that they're just enough there to make each class feel unique, but I don't think it really lives up to the claims that Sierra made of 3 games in 1. The overall story remains entirely unchanged, but I did appreciate the variety. Like I said, as these differences present themselves in the narrative, we'll explore them in more detail. But there's only really enough difference to make it feel fresh, not enough to make it feel like an entirely different game. One of Lorianne Cole's stated design goals was to ensure that the world felt fleshed out and real, and in order to accomplish this, they grounded each chapter of the series in a different region's culture and mythology. Quest for Glory 1, for instance, is grounded primarily in Germanic fairy tale, but does vary from this theme somewhat by incorporating Baba Yaga, a character of Slavic folklore origin, as the primary antagonist. With the history explored, it's time to dive into the heart of the game, and we'll start with its unforgettable introduction. This section of the game at this point is so deeply burned into my brain that it could probably be referred to as a core memory. Even today, whenever I boot this title up, it stirs something deep within my soul. From here, we'll click Start New Hero, and we can choose between Fighter, Magic User, and Thief. For the canonical playthrough of the retrospective, we're going to play as a Fighter, but I will include footage from the other two classes at various points to discuss what makes each different. Fighters are masters of arms, and they wield a sword and a shield and eventually are able to wear heavy chain armor. And as someone who's a huge fan of Knights and Barbarians, as well as being a 15-year warrior main in World of Warcraft, this class has always really appealed to me, and so it's where I'm going to start. After selecting our class, we get to customize our character's starting stats. We have 50 points to spend, though each raise of a stat that you already know costs 5 points, and buying into an untrained stat costs you an initial 15 points. So it's not really 50, but that's the number that they chose. I opt to purchase climbing for this run because it just didn't feel right to me that my big rugged fighter couldn't scale a few obstacles, and after that I pump up a few of my most useful stats. Strength to increase my damage, as well as oddly enough my health in this game, vitality to increase my all-important stamina pool, parry and dodge to improve my survivability in early combat, some agility to increase not only my stamina pool some more, but also impact how quickly I can perform actions in combat, and finally I sink some points into luck. And this is honestly kind of a waste. See, it's said that luck impacts your monster encounter rate, as well as just giving you a chance to succeed at actions that you're not quite skilled enough to actually pull off. But in all my playthroughs, I can't really tell a difference. And there are plenty of forum posts out there about people who believe that the luck stat is either bugged or just doesn't do anything. So in the future, I'd likely put those points elsewhere. As an important note on skills though, if you don't buy into one at character creation, it's just not available to you at all. This character, for instance, will never have access to magic. There's no mechanic in the game to buy into a skill during gameplay. I go back and forth on this because I understand the choice from a game design perspective, and I understand the idea of making those early game decisions very impactful, but I also would have been very interested to see some sort of mechanism for learning a new skill during gameplay. Perhaps a high in-game money cost or some sort of interesting quest. Every skill you have points in at character creation gets to be raised through use during the game, so it would have been cool to get to train a new skill as the game progressed by doing something that taught it to you. However, that could just be the more modern gamer in me talking, and I recognize that in modern gaming, flexibility tends to go a long way, and that just wasn't how games were made back then. Moving on though, with our would-be hero created, it's time to get into the proper game, and right from the start, I'm yet again hit, quote, right in the feels, as my kids would say. The epic combination of the music and the beautiful hand-drawn backgrounds create a sense of pure enchantment within me. And from that very first moment, the game has me hooked all over again, just like when I was a kid. We stride into the gates confident and with a swagger both in our step as well as in our outfit. See, we're a very recent graduate from the famous Adventurers Correspondence School, and we've come to the valley and town of Spielburg in an effort to forever cement our heroic legend in a way that would make Philoctetes himself proud. Or at least we hope so. Oh, and of course, There's also the fact that an avalanche has conveniently trapped us in the valley, but every hero needs a little nudge to start their story, right? Welcome to Spielburg. It's a quaint little Germanic town located in a valley of the same name, and it's all run by this guy, the Baron, Stefan von Spielburg, most recent patriarch of the family for whom the location was named. Everything may look quaint and fairy tale-like, but little do we know that trouble is lurking for us in this supposedly peaceful valley. Before we get started, we're going to talk about our interface because this is, after all, a video game. It's standard point and click stuff. Large hand-drawn environments with lots of detail. Right-clicking your mouse can scroll through various action choices. You have move, look, use, or speak. You can also change to an item you've selected from your inventory. Anyway, we're going to check out the settings menu really quickly. This is where we save and load the game, which I'd recommend you do very often because it is possible to soft lock yourself in a game like this. It's also here that we'll find 3 sliders: detail, volume, and speed. Volume is self-explanatory, of course, so let's discuss the other 2. Detail is related to background animation and that kind of thing. Many people tend to turn it down because it's believed that doing so causes less issues with DOSBox. It's important to note that I am playing the Steam version of this game. I do also own it on GOG, and its DOSBox issues are similar to that of the Steam version. We're not going to dive deep into those issues, but we will talk about them a couple of times in the video. I will say that it was recommended to me during my Twitch streams of this game that I should download ScumVM and that it fixes a lot of the issues, but I didn't do that for this playthrough because I didn't want to mess with it. I just ran through native DOSBox. The other slider, and arguably the most important one, is the speed slider. For a majority of my time in this game, on all 3 classes in all 7 playthroughs, I have this cranked either all the way to the max or very close to it, and I'm going to show you why. This is a comparison of how fast your character moves off the screen from the starting point, depending on where you have your speed set. For me, I really struggle with the game at any speed less than about 80%. However, there are downsides to cranking your speed up. For instance, raising the speed makes certain combats much more difficult, and it makes it harder to solve admittedly a small number, but a notable number of the game's puzzles. So if you're new to the game, you may want to consider not turning the speed up at all, or at least not turning it up all the way. It's also possible that you just would enjoy the game at a more leisurely pace. So do what makes you happy. With the sliders set to where I want them though, it's time to start talking to people and exploring this town. The gentleman here is none other than the good sheriff, Schultz Meisterson. By clicking our talking mouth icon on him, we can initiate a dialogue and see the aforementioned dialogue tree options. If this were the EGA version of the game, you would have to ask about all of this stuff individually by typing ask about blank. And if you didn't know what was going on, you'd have to come back to NPCs a lot after wandering around and learning about a new topic. I'll admit that there's something to be said for the role-playing value in that, but I'll take the dialogue trees. It just makes the game a lot more efficient, and sometimes they could be kind of obscure if you didn't know what you were looking for. Now, in talking with Schultz, we come to learn that there's indeed trouble brewing right here in the valley, and that's trouble with a capital T that rhymes with B, and that stands for brigands. See, they're robbing travelers. They're making the forest unsafe, and it's devastated the valley. Trade is drying up. People are moving away. Things are bad. So it sounds to me that this valley is in need of a good old-fashioned hero. Luckily for them, we're here now. Chatting further with the sheriff reveals that we should head over to the Adventurers Guild. So that's what we do. We activate run mode, and we do this specifically to be consistently raising our vitality stat, thus granting us more stamina, and off we head. Moving against the edge of the screen sends us to the next one, and this one, to the left, includes the guild hall, the magic shop, and the home of a little old lady. For our purposes as a fighter, it would largely seem like only the guild hall is relevant, but that's where the point system in the game comes into play. See, in the upper right corner of the screen, you can clearly see how many points we have, and currently it's 2 of 500. You get points from lots of different activities, asking people about specific important information, accomplishing plot critical tasks, and sometimes for things that feel completely random and or pointless depending on the class you're playing. As an example, even as a fighter who has no real business even going into the magic shop, after all, I have no aptitude and no inclination for the mystic arts, there are points to be gained there. By talking with Zara, the owner of the shop, we're going to get a few points, so we will need to head over there at some point in the future. For now, though, we enter the guild hall, and it's one of my favorite bits of the game as far as environmental storytelling goes. The walls are adorned with slain monster heads, a cozy fire burns, and an aged adventurer snores in a chair. This isn't exactly the glory days for this hall, but you can tell that at one point, this was a heady place to be. Off in the corner, however, is what we came for, and it's a feature I really appreciate about this game, and that's the bulletin board. Here we can get a general overview for everything that plagues this little valley, and it gives us some direction. It's not everything, and there's plenty still to be discovered as we play through, but it does give us a solid starting point. I love the flavor by the way of the notes tacked to the bulletin board, as well as the added in writing touches to illustrate how long some of these tasks have been waiting for some adventurer to complete them. Reading through the notes, we can see that the healer has lost her ring, and she's offering cash for various alchemical reagents. We also learn that the Baron's 2 children have disappeared, and apparently did so quite a while ago based on the age of these notes, as well as the fact that the brigands have a leader and a warlock that the Baron is hoping somebody will deal with. Playing through the game for this video, I actually looked at it much more critically than I've ever looked at it in the past, and I noticed things I've never noticed in my several dozen playthroughs. Specifically, just how good the writing actually is. The details with regards to the older notes on the bulletin board really start us on a path to recognize the environmental storytelling that's present. In addition, speaking with the guildmaster, even without voice acting, you can tell he's wistful. He speaks of heady days long since past where the guild hall was full of adventurers and active, but now it's just a place for a couple of old men to swap some stories. There's a sadness in what he talks about, as though he's mourning something that's now all but a memory. This is laid out in a few other places in town as well that we've not yet seen, but I am going to talk about here. In other areas of the town, you find the butcher, the baker, and the barber's shops, and they're all closed up and locked down because there's nothing happening in this town. Most people have moved away. Now, this is primarily a game mechanic to not need to add environments that aren't plot relevant, but having them locked up, dusty, run down, it all really adds to the air of decline that clings to Spielburg as a whole. While we're still here, we'll plant the seeds of our legacy in the town by signing our name into the guild ledger, and then we'll have a quick chat with Hans.
Who is this Hans?
Hans is the aged guildmaster here in town, and we're going to chat with him really quick and learn a little bit more of the valley before we head over to the magic shop. There's nothing here for us, but I admit I've always enjoyed the highly dramatic entrance of the mysterious woman who runs the place. We'll head out and explore the rest of what remains of the town. We'll talk with the young centaur girl who runs the produce stands, and we'll head in and have a conversation with the shopkeep who admits he's always dreamt of being an adventurer, but he's never mustered up the courage. He's our first real example of some of the Sierra brand of humor that's being put on display, as we learn that the book he's reading is actually titled Quest for Glory, A Hero's Death. Further west, we can explore an alley where we'll meet a young beggar. After we give him a few coins, he'll further the idea that this valley is suffering, as he explains that even he is considering on moving on to new climes because the begging has dried up. Afterwards, we'll check out the local bar and we'll discover a mysterious note from B to someone also named B. The note discusses that the pair need to hold off on meetings for a while because he is getting suspicious. So this is an interesting note because it's always felt slightly disjointed to me, if I'm honest. It sets up a mechanic that will be important later, but it's also a mechanic that's only used twice throughout the entire game. It's always felt like it wasn't fleshed out as well as it could be, almost like there's cut content regarding this note system, especially when you play as a thief. But I'll discuss that at greater length a little bit later. With the note read and the unhelpful patrons of the bar talked to, this, by the way, is where the butcher, baker, and barber have taken to spending all of their time, we've now explored the little town, and it's time to muster our courage and head outside the safety of the walls. By heading as far east as we possibly can, right out of the front gate, we'll discover proof of the avalanche that sealed us into the valley for the time being. Heading back to the west towards the town, we'll discover a small fox caught in a wicked and very painful looking trap. Much to our surprise, the animal will speak to us, asking us that we set him free. By taking pity on the small creature, we do so, and he then gives us some advice as well as some information. He informs us that the valley is actually cursed, the ogress Baba Yaga having placed a foul enchantment on it years ago, and specifically one on the Baron's daughter as well. In order to break this spell, we need to speak with the Dryad. This is an example of what I was talking about earlier in the video. See, the game is giving us clues and stories as we play, and it's filling out our proverbial quest log. I'm a big fan of this, and I always have been. This interaction is particularly cool to me because it lets the player know that there is a Dryad out there and it's someone that we should be on the lookout for, and that we should strongly consider helping her. Back at the town gate, if we head directly north, we can find the healer's hut. We know that she has some quests for us because she posted about them on the bulletin board back in the Adventurers Guild Hall. So we knock on the door and we're brought inside to speak with her. We ask her about a number of things, and in doing so, we learn about the ring that she's lost, the wares that she sells, and of course the spell components that she's looking for us to acquire for her. She's also willing to share with us her opinion on the Baron as well as the brigands. Now, it's important to note that if you're doing a run specifically for points, you need to be sure and click on some dialogue options here that don't directly yield points, but they do open up avenues to get points later, specifically with regards to spell components. Clicking on the dialogue options for Trollbeard and Cheetar Claws don't increase your score themselves. However, they do contain triggers which enable you to obtain those reagents in the future, which you do then turn in for points. So it's important not to skip them if you're going for that perfect score. As we exit the hut, we're once again reminded about the healer's missing ring. Outside, there's a yappy little bird in a nest, and this particularly stands out because it's animated, and that sets it apart from other set dressing. Examining the nest with the eye icon describes it as crafted from items stolen from the healer's garden. In addition, occasionally the nest will twinkle, which is a curious attribute for a nest made out of twigs and leaves. Perhaps there's more to it than meets the eye. Here's our first big example of having multiple ways to solve a problem. Now, you could solve the fox problem in different ways, but this is the first big quest that really lets you do things differently depending on what skills you have and what class you are. We need to get that nest down. So how do we go about doing that? Well, we could climb the tree and clamber across the limb maybe, or maybe we could throw things at it and knock it down. For now, we're going to start with climbing because after all, we bought into that skill during character creation. And this is a good place to talk about stats. Every time we attempt an action, the game rolls some dice behind the scenes, and this has a few things happen. First, it determines if our action is possible and if we succeed. It also checks to see if we gain any skill increases for the action. Doing these things comes at the cost of stamina points. Stamina is a very interesting resource in Quest for Glory because it acts a lot like health. When you run out of stamina, you're dead. And this can happen at horribly inopportune times, such as in the middle of combat. So managing your stamina is actually very important. You can regain stamina by resting or by drinking vigor potions that you purchase from either the healer or from Zara at the magic shop. However, you can't rest infinitely. You can't rest whenever you want. So it does kind of provide some pacing issues, which we will talk about a little bit later. In order to climb this tree, though, we're going to have to raise our climbing skill, and the best way to do that is just to spam attempts on the tree. Each attempt, as I mentioned, burns stamina, but each attempt raises our skill, so it's just a matter of patience and potentially weaving in some rests. We need a score of around 30 to consistently climb the tree, so once we hit that point, which we can check by clicking on our character sheet, we're able to shimmy on up. Now, though, we need to figure out how to get to the branch. So, We click the hand on the nest and shimmy on OK. This brings us to a fun quirk in the game. Having the skill to climb the tree does not necessarily mean we have the balance to get out across the branch. See, in order to shimmy over there and successfully bend down and pick up the nest without falling, you actually need a combination of climbing to have gotten up in the first place, but also a good enough agility to safely stay on the limb. I say this because climbing is actually not the intended path for a fighter to take in order to complete this puzzle. Fighters are intended to throw rocks at the nest until it falls down. Mages can accomplish this with one of two spells, either Fetch, which brings the nest down to you, or Flame Dart, which burns the nest away and causes the ring that's hidden within to drop. Thieves are the class intended to climb the tree. I've also found that if you sneak before climbing the tree, it seems to lower the required agility stat, but that may just be coincidence. Falling out of the tree actually damages us, so there's a limit to how many times I'm willing to try. So I opted to train my throwing skill instead by picking up rocks off the ground and repeatedly throwing them at the nest. This process is identical to raising climbing, just with a different skill. After a number of misses, we finally knocked the ring free and deliver it to the healer. She's quite happy, providing us with a few gold, a couple of healing potions, and attempting to kiss us. We flee her hut to avoid further intentions, and it's then that we notice that night is closing in. Quest for Glory has a day and night cycle, which is actually quite important to the game. There are a few times where the time of day is a trigger for certain events, but it also determines the relative safety of the world that our hero is in. Once sunset arrives, you can choose to sleep all night. However, if you're not in one of the game's designated safe zones, bad things will happen. Specifically, you'll die. In addition, after sunset, the town gates are closed and barred, so getting into town again, if you're choosing to rest in the inn, is important. Now, if you have the climbing skill, it is possible to scale the walls of the town, but that's not particularly heroic now, is it? So, we'll head back into town and make our way to the Hero's Tale Inn. Inside, we'll meet the proprietor Shamin, as well as his wife, Shima. They're Kata, small anthropomorphic cat people who hail from the land of Shapir, which is somewhere far to the southeast. Tonight, though, we're not the inn's only guest, for it's now that we'll meet the disgraced merchant Abdullah Du. Abdullah entered the valley with a caravan that would have made him very wealthy. However, he was set upon by the brigands and he lost everything. Now he lives off the mercy of his friends, the Kata. Abdullah is an interesting character, as he'll not take our money because he's too proud, but he will either take a ration or a meal that we pay for. Rations are definitely the cheaper way to go, but a meal is probably kinder. After all, adventurers' rations aren't exactly tasty. The inn is a really cool location, and it's dripping with flavor, from the albeit stereotypical soundtrack down to the decor. I admit I don't care for how often I have to wait for Shima to slink her way from the kitchen each time I either sit down or place an order or consume the food I paid for, but it is what it is. After speaking with all three of them and providing Abdullah with some food, we pay the rather hefty price of 5 silvers for a bed for the night, and we sleep comfortably and, most importantly, safely. Daylight dawns and we resume our exploration. We visit the castle and learn more about the curse placed on the valley, and specifically on the lineage of the Baron who runs it. Turns out that years ago, the ogress Baba Yaga placed a curse of unrest on the graveyard, causing zombies and specters to haunt it. The Baron ordered her to lift the curse and then get out of his valley, but she refused. So he sent guards to evict her, and she killed most of them. Only one man, the captain of the guard, returned, but he was possessed by the ogress, and he spoke to the Baron in a strange voice, which I will now, for your pleasure, attempt to imitate. "Hear me, O mighty Baron. Thou hast angered me, and thus ye are cursed. All that ye value shall ye lose. All that ye treasure shall be taken from you." Then the captain also perished by dissolving into a puddle of black goo. In the castle, there are a few things we can do. We can work in the stables to earn enough silver to buy another night's stay at the inn, and we can chat with a few of the guards. The Baron sees no one at this time, but we do learn a little bit more about his missing son Bernard, as well as his missing daughter Elsa. We also hear about Yorick, the court jester who vowed to find Elsa no matter what. Leaving the castle, we resume our exploration of other parts of the forest. And that's a big thing that you do for this entire game. A lot of this game is spent traveling around the forest, obviously, and not every single scene is important. But learning the route and learning what screen connects to what screen is very helpful. As we move down past the healer's hut and to the west, we speak with Heinrich, a centaur farmer and the father of the young centaur girl we met back in town. Turns out he was badly beaten by the brigands lately, but in a strange turn of events, the leader, who wore a mask, arrived and ordered the ruffians to stop the attack and insisted that no one from the town be attacked. The leader then gave Heinrich a healing potion and ordered the followers to carry the centaur to the healer. After speaking with the farmer, we head north, and it's here that we encounter our first monster and engage in our first combat with a goblin. It's important to note, though, that combat is not automatic. The monster appears on the screen and begins to move towards the player. We can then maneuver around them or run to the next screen in order to attempt to flee. This time, however, we do choose to engage. Let's talk about combat. Combat is without a doubt the weakest part of the Quest for Glory series. It's actually so weak that in Quest for Glory 4, Sierra added a button that allowed the game to just auto-complete the combat for you. It's painfully simple, but also clunky even for the era that the game came out. I will comment, though, that it has a unique artistic style. Each background in the game was hand-drawn, as I mentioned before, but all the combat models were done with stop-motion claymation, which is unique and, in my opinion, kind of cool. The combat is very simple, though, as I mentioned. The interface is basic. The hero status on the top left with red bars for hit points, stamina, and magic points, and a red bar on the right to indicate the health of your foe. In the bottom right are our combat controls. If you're trained in magic, you can click the pentagram symbol in the middle to toggle between magic and martial abilities, but doing so without being trained in it will cause your hero to run away. Martial combat, regardless of your weapon, has 3 core abilities. Slash is on the top left, thrust is in the top right, and dodge. If you're not trained in parry, you'll have 2 directions to dodge on the bottom, but if you are trained in parry, you'll have that option on the bottom left instead. Combat makes use of a number of the skills on your character sheet. Damage is determined by your strength score. Chance to hit is determined by weapon skill. How fast you can activate an action is determined by agility, and your chance to effectively dodge and parry is determined by those respective skills. Because of this, combat's actually a very effective way to raise lots of skills at once, but it does drain a great deal of stamina and, of course, has the carried risk of death from, hit point loss. You can activate your abilities either by clicking them or by using the numpad on your keyboard. The top left button, slash in melee, corresponds to num 7, top right to num 9, bottom left to num 1, and bottom right to num 3. You can also activate the middle button to swap between interfaces using num 5. Personally, I find the numpad to be a better control scheme, but again, do what works for you. After making quick work of the goblin, we loot the body and find some silver. Further exploration of the forest reveals a massive tower built into a mountain peak. After answering a Monty Python-esque inspired set of riddles, seriously, one of the possible questions is, what is the average airspeed velocity of an unladen squallow? It is definitely a Python reference. We're granted entrance into the tower. This is the Tower of Erasmus. He's a wizard, and he has a familiar named Fenris. There's some information to be gained here by talking to him for a fighter or a thief, but this is primarily a place for magic users to rack up some unique class-only points. The eccentric wizard does give us, like I mentioned, some information about the curse and Baba Yaga, as well as the counter curse. He explains that each curse results in a prophetic counter curse being born, and that Baba Yaga's curse is countered by the following prophecy. Comes a hero from the east, free the man from the beast, bring the child from out the band, and drive the ogress from the land. Well, that puts some pressure on us, doesn't it? After all, we're a would-be hero. We entered the valley through the Eastern Pass, and as for the rest of it, we'll have to see how it develops. The pair will also tell us about a magical spell reflecting mirror that Erasmus seems to have misplaced, but that he suggests we keep an eye out for. Once we've finished talking with them, Erasmus will teleport us back to the base of the mountain, and we can then resume our exploration of the forest. To the northwest of the healer's hut, we locate Arana's Peace, an enchanted garden with a magical tree. Here we can get the flowers that the healer has listed on their desired list of components, and we can farm these essentially infinitely for a small amount of silver. This is also a safe place to rest if we get caught out at night. There's also a tree here that we can eat a piece of fruit from, which will fill our bellies for our daily meal. This does seem to be a bit buggy though, because often you'll eat it and then you don't need to eat for several days rather than just one. There's also a stone with carved runes on it that can be accessed by magic users using the open spell to obtain a mystic scroll that will teach you the spell of calm. To the southeast of this enchanted grove, there's a cave guarded by a fearsome ogre, and we quickly discover that we are no match for this guy, and we need to do some serious leveling of our weapon skill as well as likely our strength. It does bring a question to our minds though. What exactly is contained within a cave that the designers would put such a fearsome creature outside of it? From the cave, we can head southwest and discover a quartet of plants that spit a seed back and forth from one another. This location is clearly important given how unique it is, but we don't know exactly how yet. Further south, we discover not only the graveyard, which during the day isn't particularly dangerous, but also an archery target where we can practice our throwing. To the west, there's a ring of mushrooms which we can pick, and we know that the healer is looking for magic mushrooms, so we grab some to take back and sell to her. These mushrooms are one of the biggest exploits available in Quest for Glory 1, at least if you're not some kind of speedrunner. Quest for Glory 1 is arguably the only game in the series where the economy of the game is any kind of challenge. Since we're playing as a recently graduated adventurer from Adventurers College, all of our stats, as well as our purse, are quite low. So stamina potions, healing potions, food, all of these things cost money, as do a handful of quest critical items. Money in Quest for Glory is divided into silver and gold, and 10 silver is equal to 1 gold. This is why I described the inn and its 5 silver price point as fairly expensive. We earn money through a variety of ways. We can loot monsters. Each monster can drop a range of silver rewards. Cash is also awarded for completing the quests on the bulletin board and the guild hall, such as the Healer's Ring quest that we did earlier. But generally this is a major undertaking, and while lucrative, it's not really quick. Each time we clean out the stables at the castle, we're also paid 5 silvers, but this task is tiring and it takes up a fair amount of the in-game time. Finally, we can sell components to the healer. As with monsters, each component carries a different bounty associated with it. The healer will recycle flasks for 1 silver apiece, but given that you bought the potions in the first place, this barely even counts as an income source. As we discussed earlier, you can also get 5 silvers per bunch of flowers from Arana's Peace that you sell to her. However, you can only carry 2 bunches of flowers at a time, so that's a total of 10 silvers per run from the healer to the grove and back. This is 8 screens each way for a total of 16 screens of travel per 10 silver. Not exactly efficient for grinding cash, but it is a nice little bonus if you happen to be near the Arana's Peace area. Cheetar claws are valued at 5 silver per claw, and each cheetar has a random number of claws that you can successfully harvest after you kill it. However, cheetars are dangerous monsters, and this is not usually an efficient method of earning gold, but be sure to do it at least once so you get the points for it. It's also not something you can do until later in the game anyway, and by then you've mostly outgrown your need for money. Trollbeard is also listed on her components list, but she doesn't actually give cash for these. She only provides healing potions. Again, be sure to do this once for the points, but it's not a cash farm. And same with cheetars. Trolls are probably the most dangerous monster in the game, so it's not like we'd be farming them in the first place. This brings us to magic mushrooms. The healer will give us 1 gold per handful of mushrooms, and you're only limited to how many handfuls you can pick up by how much weight you can effectively carry. Now, after a couple of handfuls, the hero's score will go up, and the healer will tell us that she no longer needs any more mushrooms. However, there's a bug in the game's script, and even though she says she no longer needs mushrooms, she will A, still take them, and B, still pay for them. This is effectively an infinite gold farm and can easily defeat the economy issues that exist in the game. I will say, though, that the economy in this game is only as much of a challenge as you make it, however. There is a clear-cut path to get everything you need paid for by the time you need it. The only class that can really benefit from this is the wizard, because you can buy all the spells from Zara as well as magic potions so you can grind out your magic faster. But in the end, the glitch isn't really necessary, and while it does speed up progression and get a few very minor hurdles out of the way, it's not really that important in the grand scheme of things. To the east of the archery range, we find the Flying Falls, and just to the south of that is a lake. Near the falls is an odd door carved into the cliff face. If the hero is skilled enough in climbing, they can scramble up the damp rock face, and will in fact remark that it's somewhat easier to do than it should have been, and from there they can knock on the door. If you don't have the climbing skill, you can throw rocks at the door to knock on it, or you can cast the open spell as a mage, which will do what it says on the tin, though that doesn't get you inside. For that, you do need to use detect magic to reveal the ladder, which exists hidden against the rock face, which is why you can climb it easily. Doing any of these things will result in meeting Henry the Hermit. He's a very talkative individual for a hermit, and if you're a magic user, he'll actually teach you the trigger spell, which is what he uses to hide his ladder. He'll also explain that he is who Erasmus lent the aforementioned reversal magic mirror to, but he's since lent it to the brigand warlock. He explains that the warlock isn't actually so bad, but that the brigands are terrible, and that's why he hides his ladder with the spell. As I leave, he offers me a place to sleep at night in exchange for a ration if I'm ever caught stuck out of town. This isn't a particularly restful sleep, however, so it's almost universally better to just run up to Arana's Peace. Heading west from the falls and past the archery target, we happen upon a white stag. I say white because that's what the game tells us it is, but he's definitely a pale blue color. Approaching the stag will cause him to run to the next screen, and we can follow him if we choose. Depending on where the stag is initially encountered, there may be a couple of screens to follow him through, but eventually he'll lead us to a lone tree standing in a clearing. Drawing close to that tree will cause a woman to step out of it, and this is the dryad that the fox told us about. She'll ask us if we're one with the woods, and if we agree, she'll task us with obtaining a spitting spirea seed and bringing it to her so that she can ensure its propagation. Aha! So that's what those weird red plants are, and now we know what we need to do with them. Remember how I told you that you could soft lock yourself? Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't note that you can easily lose the game at various points in this short set of interactions. First, when you meet the butcher in the town earlier in the game, he'll mention that he wishes someone would bring down the white stag. So some players might be inclined to attack it. Doing so will cause him to run, and when you enter the clearing and meet the dryad, she'll kill you. If you refuse to be one with the wood or refuse to get the seed, you'll soft lock yourself ever being able to progress. In addition, if you harm the flowers in any way while trying to get the seed, the dryad will also kill you. Anyway, making our way back to the spitting spirea plants and solving this puzzle, it's exactly identical to solving the ring puzzle, just with a higher difficulty curve. Those with magic skills can use the fetch spell. Those who can climb can do that. Or you can throw a rock and cause the seed to divert and fall to the ground. Whichever way you choose to go about it, you'll obtain the seed and take it back to the dryad. I admit I'm a little bit disappointed that this puzzle is identical to the ring puzzle, but I do like that it's slightly more open to the heroes that may have bought into unusual skills. One complaint that I had earlier with the ring and the tree was that climbing for it wasn't really workable if you'd bought into climbing, because climbing and agility raise at different rates, so you could get up the tree but not necessarily get safely across the branch and could end up frustrated. Here though, all you need to do is get up to one of the small ledges. I like the freedom, but I do wish there was slightly more variety between these two puzzles. After obtaining the seed, we take it back to the dryad and drop it into the limbs of her tree. She informs us that she'll now take the seed to boldly grow where none has grown before. How, though? Okay, how is this woman, who is clearly attached to a tree, going to take a seed somewhere else? Who knows? Maybe she'll send it with the stag or the fox or a squirrel, but it's always struck me as a little bit weird. As a reward, the dryad informs us that the curse on the valley is not only harming the people that live here, but also nature itself. So we can rid the valley of this curse, she teaches us the recipe for the Dispel Potion, and she provides us with one of the ingredients, the magic acorn. Turns out, in order to make the potion, I need flowers from Arana's Peace, green fur, fairy dust, a magic acorn, and flying water. So I head back to the healer and tell her the recipe as well as give her the acorns. Turns out the flowers I've already provided to her will work just fine, so it's just a matter of finding the other ingredients. I resume exploring and I stumble upon a goblin training ground where I can battle ever increasing waves of goblins in kind of a gauntlet style format. This is great, by the way, for grinding up combat skill as well as earning a little bit of money. To the south, I find a strange bouncing blue bob, and as I go past it, I manage to also narrowly avoid a brigand ambush outside of their hideout. I also locate a bunch of stone-covered holes that have small, furry, Muppet-looking creatures that pop in and out of them. And turns out, one of them is green. Attempting to communicate with them causes the green one to pop up above the ground and chat with me. He and his friends are meeps, and they live in these holes. If we ask about his fur, he'll tell me that his fur is best because it's green, which is apparently why we need it for the recipe, is because it's the best fur, I guess. And if we inquire further about it, he will happily provide us with some green fur by painfully ripping it out of his own head. If playing a magic user, you can also obtain a scroll of detect magic just by asking the meeps about it. Further exploration reveals Baba Yaga's hut, cordoned off by a spiked fence topped with skulls, and this is to the north of the goblin training ground. Conversing with the eyeless skull allows us to learn the rhyme to get the hut to sit down, but he'll only open the gate if we make a deal with him. Turns out he's a bit envious of all the glowing eyes that his friends have, or I guess I use the word friend loosely, they're skulls after all. But he demands that we find him a glowing gem which will give him the same attribute. We agree, and we set off once more. Now, as we've been exploring, we continue to do battle with some various foes. We've fought clumsy sauruses, wily brigands, and several more goblins. Perhaps soon, we'll feel like we can try our luck against that ogre again. As we wander past town, though, I find a mysterious figure leaned against the wall, casually playing with a knife. This is Bruno, and he's obviously bad news. First off, he's wearing a black cape and has a dark black goatee. In video game speak, especially for the era this game was made, that's bad. Also, he won't even talk to us if we don't give him some money, and all his information is very rudimentary. Turns out, though, that getting him to talk is worth points, so I do pay him a couple of silver, ask him a question or two, and then head away. Directly east of the healer's hut, I find evidence of freezing temperatures, and as I continue even further east, we discover an icy cave. As I approach the mouth of the cave, a massive blue-skinned being barrels out, swinging an axe that is larger than me. However, despite being a frost giant, he's not hostile, and we can learn that he's Bragi from Jotunheim, and he's far from home. Further chatting reveals that he's looking for fruit to mellow out the taste of his mead, and he's offering a glowing gem as payment. He simply needs fruit to fill his fists, which is probably a lot of fruit. Good thing we know someone who sells apples, though. Hilda the farmer's daughter back in town. So we head over and buy 50 apples and make our way back. 50 appears to be enough because he takes them and gives us the gem before heading back to his northern home. Bragi is one of my favorite interactions in the whole game. First, it subverts your expectations, especially if you've already encountered the ogre near the cave you initially think you may need to fight Bragi, but the music cue is set up just such that it becomes almost immediately clear that this is a bad idea. See, this music cue only happens twice in the entire game. Here when you meet Bragi, and one other time that we'll talk about later. Then there's the character design, not just visually, but also how he carries himself. The sound of his axe as it cuts through the air menacingly, and his speech patterns in his writing are very unique. I love Bragi. So now I've got the gem for the gate skull, and I know I'm missing 2 ingredients for the dispel potion, flying water and fairy dust. In addition, I know that there's still that ogre and the cave to the north to be dealt with. When it comes to finding the fairy dust, I've got some suspicions, and these are suspicions that I actually remember having when I was a kid. I remember trying to figure out where I'd get fairy dust, and remembering stories I'd read about fairy rings of mushrooms, and so as night falls, I head off, not to sleep, but instead to brave the dark. I make my way carefully to the mushroom ring, and sure enough, fairies are dancing in the dark. Drawing close to the ring results in them noticing us, and they demand that we entertain them with dance. I figure the only way they'll give me any dust is if I make them like me, so I agree and begin to dance. This is another of those hidden stat rolls in the game. If the agility score on the hero is high enough, he'll perform an elegant and honestly rather long dance that makes the fairies very happy. They'll ooh and ah and be incredibly pleased with you, and then treat you much more nicely. If the hero's agility score is too low, though, the hero will do a poor attempt at a dance, and you'll get openly mocked by the fairies. Either way, however, as long as you agreed to dance on your own, you can talk to them and get some dust. However, it's important to note that you must have an empty flask in your inventory, or you'll have to come dance again and do the whole thing over. So now there's only one missing reagent, flying water. Now, the only water I've seen at all is in the lake and in the falls, which have been referred to as the Flying Falls. So, the night's still pressing in, I head for them. Along the way, I'm attacked by a terrifying beast known as a cheetar. This is a cross between a cheetah and a centaur. It's all claws and teeth, and this is a really challenging battle. But I do pull through, downing this fearsome creature. I, of course, grab its claws and make my way to the falls, but I'm in pretty rough shape. So after getting a flask full of the water, I give Henry a ration and sleep the night away. Or at least I try to. As I mentioned earlier, sleeping at the hermits is not particularly restful and doesn't result in getting very much rest. But day does dawn and I can travel safely through the forest once more. I head to the healers and give her the last ingredients, and she tells me that brewing the potion will take some time, that I should come back later. With the confidence of one who's just killed a cheetar, I head back to the cave and do battle again with the ogre, who I easily manage to kill. He drops a massive chest, which I break open for a bit of cash, and then enter the cave. Within the cave, I find a bear, but something's wrong. The bear is chained in place, and a light glows from deeper within the cave. This is highly suspicious, and then the prophecy that Erasmus told us rings in my mind. Free the man from the beast. With the exception of the white stag, this is the first beast I've seen, and given that the dryad seems to be friends with the white stag and wants us to, free the land from the curse, can't be the white stag. So, while I would usually assume that the prophecy means that the beast is guarding a man, something about the chain makes me rethink that. And obviously I've played through the game, but I had these same thoughts when I was a kid. So rather than attacking, I give the bear some food and it pacifies him, allowing me to slip further into the cave. An important note about this particular action of feeding the bear. Even as a mage, you get the ability to do this puzzle in two ways. One, you can cast Calm and still walk past the bear, but you actually don't get any points for doing that. Feeding the bear is a very specific action that gives you points toward getting that perfect score. This one action is why I had to redo my mage playthrough 3 times, is because I could not figure out where I was missing that single point. At the very back of the cave, I find a small blue creature sleeping on a rock with a large key around its neck. Perhaps this is the key to the chain that holds the bear captive. This is another puzzle with multiple solutions, and it's dependent on your class. As a magic user, there are actually points to be had from killing this creature, and you'll engage in a wizard's duel that can actually be fairly challenging if you're not quick and you're not accurate with your spellcasts. As a thief, you can sneak right up and stealthily remove the key from around the kobold's neck, and no points are given for killing the creature. As a fighter, you do need to kill the creature as well, similar to the mage, but you must either throw rocks at him. Daggers don't work despite doing more throwing damage because they put you in melee combat for some reason, or you have to engage in melee combat. Melee combat with the kobold brings up a combat interface similar to a regular fight, but it doesn't change the perspective at all. It's an odd side view, and as clunky as the base combat system is, this fight is worse. With enough health, you can tank the kobold's spells, and high enough weapon skill, you'll land the awkward hits across the rock, and then you're able to take down the creature and retrieve the key. In the bottom section of the cave, there is a treasure chest that contains a bunch of gold, but it's trapped and will explode when opened. As a modern gamer who Spent a lot of time with adventure games in the past, but hasn't played many of them recently. I'll admit that this is kind of an obscure thing. Most people I've talked to who are newer to the series don't actually ever find this chest and get frustrated by the lack of points here. However, from my understanding, older adventure gamers tend to scour every single corner of the map, so that might explain the difference, because you do bump into this chest just by walking around near the bottom of the cave. So, with treasure and key in hand, we proceed back to the bear. Using the key causes a miraculous transformation, the lock shattering and the bear morphing into a young man who arrogantly reveals himself to be none other than the Baronet Bernard von Spielburg, the Baron's missing son. Using some sort of magic, he teleports away. Before he does so, he suggests we pay a visit to the castle in order to get our reward. This has always been a cool sequence to me. The cinematic transformation is really cool, but DOSBox does tend to rear its ugly head here every once in a while, because you can get either soft locked into this screen very, very rarely, or more frequently, it bugs your graphics out and you need to save and reload the game in order to get them back to normal. I return to the castle, where Carl the gate guard announces that we're in fact expected. We're greeted with fanfare at the keep door and escorted inside, where the Baron and his son have a chat with us. The Baron states that for the first time in years, he feels a semblance of his old self returning, and that he has hope that we can in fact fulfill the prophecy and free the valley from the clutches of the curse. He insists that we join him and his son for dinner, and we spend the night in the castle before returning to our adventure. You are able to chat with Bernard, but it's not really worth points. You learn that he arrogantly decided to fight the kobold, and the kobold turned him into a bear. So, kind of a punk kid. From the castle, we venture to the healer, and she gives us the now completed Dispel Potion. From there, I make my way back to town. After all, I have the Baron's reward money burning a hole in my pocket, and I know that Casper at the dry goods store has a set of beautiful chainmail armor that I can now afford. I pick it up, and I head over to the bar. I'm going to talk about one of my few qualms with this game and its narrative. The reality is, there's zero reason to go back to the bar here, but there's a vital clue that appears in it once the hero has freed the Baronet. Remember that note that we found at the beginning of the game? The one from B to another person named B that I talked about having issues with? Well, the second of those notes will now turn up once the Baronet is no longer polymorphed. However, there's nothing to do in the bar. The drinks you can buy are pointless, literally. They don't contribute to your score. One of them actually causes you to black out and get robbed, and in fact lose score, and the dragon's breath that you get recommended to drink a couple of times will actually just outright kill you. So unless you're a thief and are going into the Thieves Guild, which is incidentally located in the bar's basement, a whole bunch of times rather than just like the twice that's required for score, there's zero reason to be back in this location. Now, as it turns out, you only get score points for finding one of the notes total, so as long as you found the first one at the beginning of the game, you're fine. But you're then relying on randomly stumbling to the archery target after freeing the bear to get the next clue. It's just not particularly intuitive, and I really don't care for it. I wish there was a reason to go back to the bar other than just happening to be there, or in all honesty, like I did when I was a kid, I was hunting for what to do next. So, upon entering the bar, we find the other note. This one calling, as I mentioned, for an urgent meeting at the archery target. So I make my way there, and another issue with this section of the game. This is where a timed trigger system in Quest for Glory really becomes a problem. The meeting will only take place during the midday time frame in the game's cycle. You can click up in your menu and access the ability to see what time of day it is, and it must read as midday in order for the NPCs to have their meeting. Any other time and nothing happens. But again, this isn't mentioned anywhere, and it honestly could be. The note could just say, meet me at the archery target at noon, or something along those lines, but it doesn't. And since it doesn't say that, I arrive at the archery target and no one's there because the trigger hasn't been met. What's interesting is despite my dozens of playthroughs of the game, I didn't know that this was a trigger until playing through the game on Twitch for this video, where a member of my community let me know that's what's going on. Because there's no one there, I instead head up to Baba Yaga's and I give the skull guard at the gate his new gem. He's pleased, although he does insult how we look, but he does willingly lower the gate for us, and I can walk in and tell the house the Hut of Brown now sit down rhyme so that I can enter. Unfortunately, this ogress is a crafty and malicious old witch and freezes me in place and turns me into a frog. After a kind of comical bit about what dish she'd cook me into, because I honestly think this Baba Yaga has sort of weird Julia Child vibes, she instead decides to task me with obtaining a mandrake root from the graveyard. She specifies, however, that it must be pulled at exactly midnight, lest it be ruined. And she also only gives me till the next dawn to find it. We know from talking to people that the graveyard is cursed, specifically by Baba Yaga, and that the spooks who haunt it will kill me if I don't have an undead unguent applied to my skin. So it's back to the healer to pick one up. But first, I'm going to check the archery target again, and obviously the idea of just barging into a clandestine meeting seems bad, so I make sure to instead use the unique screen to be on the opposite side of one of the hedges. This time, I managed to hit the trigger that I didn't know existed, and I find two men having a secret meeting. One of them is Bruno, the clearly bad guy who stands outside the gate. The other is unknown, but is dressed like a brigand. Turns out his name is Brutus, though I have no idea where that information is learned in the game. I just saw it on the wiki. B&B. So these are definitely the authors of the notes, but it's weird that I never found out his name was Brutus anywhere. Eavesdropping on the pair, we learn that not only is Bruno selling secret about the Thieves Guild to Brutus, a fact that is confirmed by side quests when you play through as a thief, but that the pair are planning to move on the brigand leader once I, the hero, make my move against the organization. Another revelation is that the leader of the brigands is a woman, and that there's a laughing jackass, which lines up with descriptions of the warlock we've gotten from various other people in the valley. Now, the pieces are beginning to fall into place here, and even as a kid, I was so pleased when I made all of these connections. See, we the hero have ventured in from the east. We freed the man, Bernard, from within the beast. I also have always thought that making the baronet a bear was clever because, bear a net. Anyway, the next line of the prophecy is bring the child out the band. We know that Elsa von Spielburg was abducted by some sort of dark-winged monster when she was very young. And we know that the brigand leader is a female. We also know that the court jester Yorick went looking for her. And what do jesters do but laugh and make others laugh? So Elsa is cursed and is the brigand leader. And we know that we have the dispel potion, and thus we can free her. Anyway, continuing to listen to the dastardly duo, we learn that there's a back door to the brigands' camp, and that the door is hidden where the bouncer hops around. If you remember, earlier in the video, we located a strange bouncing blue creature, and there was a large rock leaned against the western wall. They also mention that each of them carries a key to get into it. Bruno reveals that the password is hide and go seek, and that will get Fred to walk away. Then he states that he has to get back before the chief misses him, and off he goes. We need that key, and we know this hapless brigand has it. Now, I've been told that as a fighter, you can directly walk around and confront this man and engage him in melee combat, but I've never actually done that. I always just throw a dagger at him and hit him in the heart, and he dies. Same thing with a thief. As a mage, I just blast him with a firebolt. Dispatching him isn't the tricky part of this puzzle, however. The tricky part is how to get the key. See, he dies and he falls over, and you can't climb over the hedges because they're apparently infested with hornets. And if you move down too quickly, Bruno's apparently just waiting for me and will kill you with poison daggers. So this part is actually incredibly frustrating, not just to me, but to Quest for Glory players everywhere. On my Twitch channel, when I streamed these games for this video, we talked about it several times. Many of us have never actually figured out how to get Bruno to consistently stop lying in wait to kill us. In fact, many players have carefully meandered all the way back to town, talked with Bruno outside the gate, and then gone back to the archery target only to have him somehow magically get ahead of them and kill them with poison daggers. My personal guess is that it's a similar time trigger as seeing the meeting in the first place. So in my playthroughs, I've taken to walking several screens away, doing a couple of random things, resting, and getting to a different time of day, then returning to the body. This works fairly well, but I don't know that it is the right solution. It's just what works for me. So with key in hand, I know I need to burn some daylight so I can get Baba Yaga's mandrake root. I head to the healer and purchase my undead ungent, and then grind out some combat skills at the goblin training grounds. At last, night falls, and I fritter away some more time. After all, I can only pull the mandrake root at midnight, assuming that I don't want it to get ruined and, have the curse kill me. So I need to get to the point that the time indicator reads middle of the night. Once it does, I get close to the graveyard and apply the ungent. I hurry in, and the ghosts all dance around me but are unable to harm me due to my magical protections. I pull the root from the grave and head back to the hut of the ogress. Upon entering, I'm immediately frozen and turned back into a frog. But Baba Yaga does remember that she sent me for the root, so turns me back into myself. She roots through my backpack, finds the root, and announces that she can now use this wicked and very powerful magic plant to make her prized culinary masterpiece, mandrake mousse. So how does the evil witch reward me for doing this dangerous task? By not eating me. So she teleports us outside, and the character's inner dialogue reveals that they long to give the ogress a taste of her own froggy medicine, which is honestly foreshadowing with how you should deal with the ogress near the end game. Following this, I know that my next course of action is to break into the back door of the brigand's hideout and free Elsa from the curse with the Dispel potion. However, as I mentioned earlier in the video, I'm aiming for a perfect score. In order to achieve that, I need to defeat a troll so that I can sell its beard to the healer, and as a fighter specifically, I need to defeat the weapon master at the castle, as well as kill a rare monster known as the Supersaurus Rex. Now, I haven't talked about the Weapon Master at all, but he's an NPC in the castle who will sometimes appear in the courtyard. He's a self-assured and brashly confident man who, for a fee, will train with the hero. Unfortunately, he's way better than we are. Like, miles better. One really needs to grind out stats in order to beat him, and I mean grind. I've found actually that the only guaranteed way to win is to have capped out scores in strength, agility, vitality, weapon use, parry, and dodge. You remember how early in the video we need a skill of 30 to climb the tree in order to get the ring? Capping your stats happens at 100, and I need to cap 6 stats. I'm not going to include the grinding that I did in the video, but I killed a lot of goblins and bought a lot of stamina potions. At long last, though, I was capped on those stats. And as crazy as it is, that wasn't enough. And that's for a couple of reasons. One, this is one of those fights that is heavily impacted by where you have your speed setting and your game settings set to. In addition, you have to actually take off your armor and throw most of your stuff on the ground to lose as much weight as possible in order to have a chance, because he just moves so much faster. With all that out of the way, though, I do manage to beat the braggart for the first time in all of my times playing this game. That's right, I've never one time in dozens and dozens of playthroughs as a fighter ever gotten a perfect score, because I've never managed to beat this guy until now. And despite all of the fake encouragements he's given me when he's beaten me in the past, he is an absolute baby about losing. He, in fact, claims he needs to retire and give up the sword forever because we managed to beat him. But that's no big deal to me. I've got my points, I retrieved my stuff, and now I'm off to go dino hunting. Another of the triggers that I learned about this playthrough is that certain monsters only spawn once you cross a certain threshold of weapons skill. Specifically, you'll only begin to meet trolls in the wild and Supersaurus Rexes in the wild once you have passed that point. And I don't actually know what that point was. Luckily, though, I've ground my weapon skill to cap to beat the sniveling swordsman, so it doesn't take too long for the dino to appear and we take it down easily. However, despite finding the dino very easily, I don't find any random trolls, but I do know where there's one guaranteed troll spawn, and that's Fred. You remember Fred. He was mentioned by Bruno and Brutus. You use a password to get past him in the cave. Well, if you don't use the password, he ambushes you. However, using the password and entering the cave safely are worth points. So the way I do this is I head to the hidden back door, speak the password, use the key on the rock to open it up, step inside the cave, get the points for sneaking in, and then leave again. I head one screen north and return. This door has now reset and closed again. This time, I don't speak the password. I simply use the key, open the hidden door, and walk right in. Immediately, I'm ambushed by Fred the Troll, but I'm able to take him out very easily with my capped stats. I cut off his beard, rush back to the healer, and sell it. That's everything now, except the brigand's camp. So, as Doctor Strange would say,
we're in the end game now.
I head back to the hidden door from the healer's hut and enter the cave, making my way through and popping out right at the front gate. I'm hidden behind some hedges, and I can see a burly minotaur with a flail as my last obstacle before I enter the fortress. This is Toro, and while he can be calmed with magic or snuck past if you have the sneak skill, I'm gonna have to fight him. Battle is joined, and I take him out, looting his 50 silvers and then climbing over the wall to enter the brigand's fortress. It's important to note that beating Toro is actually required to get capped skill points on a fighter, and the intended way for a fighter to enter is to actually break down the gate, but that isn't actually worth points. So I take the climbing route because I can. The foyer is a series of traps, and the best way to handle them is to use the look ability and examine everything in the room. Then you'll use the hand and touch everything, even from a distance that looks like it might be a trap. Doing so allows you to traverse the room without incident, and you can make your way into the mess hall. The mess hall puzzle is a sequence of perfectly timed events, and I say perfectly timed because if an action is performed at an incorrect timing, the hero will die despite having done what clearly is the puzzle solution. You have to do it at the right time so that you don't get seen doing it and so they can't counter you. I remember as a kid, this sequence took me a lot of attempts to master, and so now it's so deeply burned into my brain that I could largely do it with my eyes closed. So let's walk through how it works. First, we need to close the door and bar it, thus preventing the brigands from coming in the way we just entered. Once they've moved away from the door, we can then put a chair in front of the northeastern door. This prevents them from coming in that way, but it also triggers a kind of Three Stooges reference as a trio of elite brigands comes from the west. They'll start to cross across the top of the room behind the banquet table, and once they pass the little smiley face chair, we can knock down the candelabra. This prevents them from proceeding, and so they have to go around to the other side of the table. Once the second one rounds the corner, we can then climb up on the table and use the chandelier rope. This will cause us to swing across the room, slamming the door on the reinforcements, kicking the three elites in the face, and then dropping the chandelier on them. With that, we can proceed north into the Warlock's maze. A chat with the Warlock confirms our various suspicions. This is Yorick, the court jester who vowed to find Elsa, and turns out Elsa is indeed the brigand leader, just as we thought, trapped inside another identity thanks to Baba Yaga's curse. We still have to prove that we're heroes by making it through his maze, though. I won't describe it to you because it's actually one of my favorite puzzles in the game, and it's not as frustrating to learn as the mess hall. So I'll leave you to solve it yourself. Once you've done so, you can enter the leader's lair and she'll leap across the table with the sword drawn, and there's that music cue. just like I mentioned, two places where fighting isn't an option, Bragi and Elsa. I do the only thing possible, and I throw the potion of dispel at her, and watch as she transforms from the formidable fighter into the Baron's daughter. She tells me that she always used to dream that she wasn't a brigand's child, but rather a princess, and so she's thankful that we saved her. She tells me to take the potions from her desk, and Yorick, after being called in, tells us to take the mirror to counter the cursor. This is the mirror that both Erasmus and Henry mentioned clear back at the beginning of our journey. It's the one that reflects spells. I grab the mirror and flee out the back door as the remaining brigands try to hammer the door down. From here, it's a straight shot to Baba Yaga. I approach her hut, intone the rhyme, and step inside. I grip the magic mirror as she levels her predictable frog curse and reflect it right back to her. And that's the game. The valley is saved, Baba Yaga flees in a hopping mad frenzy, and I find myself quickly taken to the Great Hall, where we're presented with the title of Hero of Spielburg. I'm then whisked off on Abdul-Adu's magic carpet, recovered from the brigands, along with my cat of friends, headed to the lands of Shapir for my next adventure in Quest for Glory 2. Following the final cutscene, I'm given the option to export my character so that I can use the same one in Quest for Glory 2, thus having all of my skills and all of my gold. I of course do so, and I did so with the other two characters that I achieved perfect scores on for this video. So with the game now finished, the valley saved, the ogres banished, let's talk about Quest for Glory 1, So You Want to Be a Hero. To be honest with you, it remains very nearly perfect. I have some minor qualms that I mentioned throughout this review, but they're exactly that, minor. Quest for Glory 1 remains a gold standard game in my opinion, and I honestly don't think I'm being particularly colored by nostalgia. The writing is excellent, the soundtrack is great, the story, while predictable, is fun and engaging. Combat isn't the best, but it's also not a real big focus of the game, and it's perfectly workable for what it's used for. There are a few pacing issues, sure, and to be frank, I struggle with those more now than I do with the combat. Combat is a quirk, and it's something that a player can engage with or skip as much as they'd like to. The 3 hardest combats in the game are actually entirely bypassable, especially if you're not aiming for a max score. Pacing, though, is a bit more of a challenge to overcome. Being unable to pass time to a certain point is something that I struggle with a lot, but this may perhaps be a challenge caused by my deep familiarity with the game and how quickly I can move from puzzle to puzzle. There are several examples of not being able to progress at my chosen pace because I either couldn't rest to get stamina back, or I couldn't do something because I was waiting for a certain time of day to arrive and I couldn't rest again to get to that time of day. There are also just a small handful of obscure things that can potentially annoy a new player, and even sometimes, honestly, a veteran player. Having no in-game information regarding certain monsters spawning only after a weapon skill goes up is a problem. And the most frustrating of them is the lack of communication that the meeting between Bruno and Brutus will take place only at midday, or also that you can feel like you've eluded Bruno, but then still get killed. This is just some sort of tweak to the note that would have indicated a midday meeting, and just some sort of message that came across the screen that was like, you feel that returning to town right now might be dangerous, or you get the feeling you should spend some time out and about to avoid suspicion, would have really helped with these two puzzles. I enjoy the fact that there are 3 different classes to play, and that provides me with unique puzzles to solve. As a thief, in order to cap out my score, I need to meticulously rob 2 of the houses in town, one being the little old lady on that first screen outside of the starter zone, and the other actually being the home of the sheriff. I have to associate with the underworld and discover the fringe plot that Bruno is attempting to overthrow the chief of the guild as well as Elsa. I wish this plotline had been explored more deeply because the seeds are there to make something really unique and interesting. Upon entering the Thieves Guild, you learn that the chief feels like someone is selling information to the brigands and making trouble for the guild. And this is exactly what Bruno is doing. So I wish that as a thief, I could have gotten to look into this more, catch Bruno, and maybe had a chance to turn him in to bring Bruno down a peg. As a magic user, you do get to have a deeper interaction with Erasmus and play the Mage's Maze minigame, which is admittedly kind of cool. But once you win, you can't play it again. So if you enjoy it, you have to intentionally throw the game, which is not my favorite. And beyond Mage's Maze, there is a substantial quantity of world building that takes place, which is directly tied to being a magic user. There's a discussion with Zara and Erasmus, both about what it takes to advance from the rank of magic user to full-fledged wizard, but that's just all foreshadowing. The magic user does get to care a little bit more about Arana, and given how big of a part of the overall QFG universe Arana ends up being, in hindsight, that is pretty cool, but it was very minor in this title as a standalone. I do wish the magic user had more to do that felt truly unique though. And that more of the story that the magic user gets to dive into was actually gameplay focused rather than simply foreshadowing and world building specifically for Quest for Glory 2, because all of that pays off during Quest for Glory 2. But from Quest for Glory 1, it does feel a bit more hollow than the other two classes. That said, having the option to play through the game as 3 unique classes was a very cool addition. Couple this with the opportunity to buy into various skills, thus customizing your character, makes for a very unique way to play through the game time and time again. Especially as a veteran player, if you choose not to shoot for a perfect score every time, you can make individual runs different enough to remain fresh. It also helps that the puzzles are enjoyable enough to remain fun even on my 100th playthrough. For reference, I did 7 playthroughs of the game for this video like I mentioned, all in a very short span of time, and not once was I bored. In conclusion, my friends, I'll say that Quest for Glory is a touchstone series in my life, and QFG 1 is where all of that started. It formulated the ideas and the concepts that would carry through for all 4 of its sequels. This is where the humor, the storytelling, and the core gameplay was seated, thus allowing for it to bloom throughout the rest of the series. While QFG 1 may not be the best in its own series, that honestly just stands as a testament to how good this series truly is. And so I'm going to go on record and state that even 30 years after its initial release, Quest for Glory 1 is an excellent game and stands amidst the pantheon of some of the best. I'd love to see it get a modern remake, and I confess I've always hoped that the series would see a revisit similar to what was done with the King's Quest series back in 2015. In fact, I know that somewhere I have a concept document for an MMO set in the Quest for Glory Gloriana universe that I put together a very, very long time ago. This title and its sequels are possessed of charming characters, quirky humor, a familiar yet fantastical world, and a tale of adventure that stole my heart when I was a kid, and revisiting it as an adult didn't disappoint. If you're a fan of point-and-click adventures and you haven't played Quest for Glory, it's well worth your attention. All of that said, thanks so much for watching. I've been Shrimpicles, and I have lots more of these retrospectives on the way, both for the rest of the Quest for Glory series and a whole bunch of other games. So if you've enjoyed today's video, please be sure to click subscribe so that you don't miss out on any of my future content. It really helps a small creator like me out. Also, do consider leaving a like on the video if you enjoyed it, because that gets it out to more people, and comment down below what your favorite class in Quest for Glory is, which of the games in the series you love most, or even just leave a comment with whatever other games or series you might like me to look into. I stream all of my playthroughs for my videos over on twitch.tv/Shrimpicles on Mondays and Wednesdays, and I will leave the link down in the description. All that out of the way, take care, and I'll see you next time.